I'm actually not really going to talk so much about the MySQL ecosystem. I'm going to talk about the future and what I think about the future. In particular, where open source and open data are going in the age of the cloud. And when I make a statement like that, it makes me think of Casablanca, where Louis says, Major Strasser has been shot. Round up the usual suspects. And of course, we might talk about Hadoop and Cassandra and Drizzle and Gearman and Eucalyptus and maybe even Google Chrome OS. But I'm thinking of another movie, database, Web 2.0, cloud computing. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. The future is inconceivable. I'm serious. There's some really amazing things happening, and we need to get our brains around that future. At the first MySQL conference in 2005, or at least the first time I spoke at it, my keynote was called "The Future Belongs to Data." And I meant that. I meant data, not just databases. And there's this wonderful quote that I've used over the years from Ray Kurzweil, where he said, I'm an inventor, and I became interested in long-term trends because an invention has to make sense in the world in which it is finished, not the world in which it has started. So all of my activism about open source has been focused for many, many years on thinking about where is it taking us? Where is it going? And because I'm really worried that we haven't seen far enough into the future. And I'm also worried that my clicker does not seem to be working. But anyway, so you might think of me as a book publisher, or as Colin said, the guy who puts on OSCON and Web 2.0 and so on. But the real mission that we have at O'Reilly is to change the world by spreading the knowledge of innovators. And the way we do that is we try to look around at people who are living in the future already. There's this great quote from William Gibson. Many of you have probably heard me say it 100 times. The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. There are people out on the cutting edge who are living a future that will one day become ubiquitous. Back when Dale Doherty introduced me to Tim Berners-Lee in the summer of 1992 and said, we got to cover this World Wide Web thing in this upcoming book on the internet. The future was already here. There were a few hundred websites, and there were a few hundred people living that future, but it became ubiquitous. And then we start to look and say, well, is this thing becoming mainstream? So I'm going to tell you some seemingly unconnected technology stories, and then I'm going to try to connect the dots. So first story. You guys probably know we launched a magazine called Make about 5 years ago. It's focused on hardware hacking. And one of the things that we saw was that there was this really bubbling up focus on hardware again, on sensors. We actually started an event called Maker Fair. Last year we had something like 70,000 people. If you've never been, you should go. It's like a county fair with robots. There's this new hacker revolution happening, and it's connected with stuff, but it's also connected with the cloud. And I really got this a couple of years ago. We published 2 books. And I was really struck by their similarities, even though they were very, very different. One was a book called Programming Collective Intelligence about the algorithms that drive the web, whether it's search and so on. And the other was about computer vision. And they had a lot in common. And I thought, ooh, really interesting pattern here. We're seeing new open source hardware platforms like Arduino take off, and these are fundamentally sensor platforms. So I want you just to start thinking about a cloud future that includes devices acting as sensors for intelligent data collection, devices whose UI is on the web rather than on the device itself. They're feeding data into multiple online services. And ultimately, this is setting the stage for robotics, augmented reality, and a whole new generation of products. So I'm going to give you a couple of those. So my second story was about the time I met Jack Dorsey, the co-founder of Twitter, to talk about his new startup, Square. We met at the Blue Bottle Cafe. And it was one of those moments. It was a little bit like Kim Stanley Robinson explained in his wonderful Mars trilogy. There's a point where a character says, he realized then that history is a wave that moves through time slightly faster than we do. Because I felt slightly out of step, because I was expecting Jack to have a laptop with him. And when he didn't have a laptop, I thought, oh, well, we're going to go back to his office so I can see what he's going to show me. And then he whipped out his phone and proceeded to show me, an early version of Square, which is the little payment system, which is a little hardware dongle that you can add into to an iPhone so it can read credit cards. Uses the camera also and location to make this super duper receipt. But the thing that was really interesting is there's a device play here, but there's also a huge cloud play. Jack was talking to me about they hope to use social networks for risk evaluation. How much credit do you give people? There's no PC here. The phone is a sensor platform. Immense amounts of processing done in real time in the cloud. This is not happening on the phone. And it's tackling a huge new business. So this is a pretty interesting wake-up call for me and for all of us. How about augmented reality? You guys have probably played with some of the things like the Yelp monocle, holding up your phone and saying, what cafes are down the street, or nearest tube, which is a great one in the UK. How far is it to the nearest subway station down any given street? You may have used something like Red Laser, where you're scanning barcodes and getting access to information in the cloud, or even Google Goggles. When they announced it, Vic Gundotra at Google I/O said, well, we took out the feature where it recognizes faces. But I got the pre-release demo with the version that did recognize faces, and it was pretty spooky to have Vic hold up the phone, take my picture, and have the phone say, that's Tim O'Reilly. This is a very different future than the one that we have been living in up till now. Another story. In Haiti, after the earthquake, there's an amazing project, joint effort by groups like Ushahidi and OpenStreetMap, where they were basically collecting data via SMS message from cell phones. Here's a collapsed building. Here's a place for people to where we need help, and collecting it on a map so that people could come and dig out the victims. Ushahidi is an amazing open source platform for all kinds of data collection by humans. So this is a way that humans are being used as sensors in these systems. But there's also the devices themselves are continually throwing off data. So you may have seen the CabSense app for New York, which basically, based on lots and lots of GPS traces, predicts what is the best corner to get a cab on at a particular time of day. So this is go over the next street over, you'll have a much better chance. Real-time intelligence on the device. Here's another one, Amy. The name stands for, actually, I can't remember the acronym. Something, what's the A? Sorry, it's Avoiding Mass Extinctions Engine. And it's basically trying to build a back end for carbon trading and various kinds of sensor data. And they basically have a project where they're collecting smart meter data in the UK. And one of the things that they found is that you can actually tell what kinds of devices people have in their homes, because every device has a unique energy signature when it turns on and off. So for example, your dishwasher looks different than your refrigerator. In fact, one model of a refrigerator looks different from another model. So this idea that everything would have to have an IP address for it to be part of the Internet of Things just ain't so. You can just watch the energy at the meter, and you can identify all the devices. Huge privacy implications, huge data collection implications. Also, front edge of a huge new market where we're going to be trying to make intelligent feedback systems that go through the power grid, that tie our whole world together. So we're moving to a world in which every device generates data, in which every action creates information shadows on the net. The next story. Some of you may have heard me tell this one before. I take out my phone, and I'm in the Google mobile search, and I put it to my ear, and it notices from the motion to my ear that it wants to go into speech recognition mode. I say pizza, and it tells me that the 3 nearest pizza places to where I am right now are Round Table Pizza at 4300 Great America Parkway, Giovanni's New York at 1127 Lawrence Expressway, and Little Caesars at 4767 Lafayette Street. Fricking amazing! I mean, think about that. And I really want to put this out to you. If you think that open source software is, has some block on the future, ask yourselves, could you do that with MySQL? You could have the mechanism for it, but you have to have the data. You have to have the business processes to collect the data. And this has been the thing that I've been obsessing about and trying to preach for the last 10 years, that the future actually does belong to the data, not just to the database. And the people who are collecting the data and managing the data are being able to deliver interesting new applications. And I think we have to get our hands around that future if we're going to think about open source having a continued impact. So this speech recognition is amazing also, just to think about it, because it doesn't work that well. But just remember, neither did Windows 1.0. The idea of speech on a phone and a speech interface is really interesting. You've got this device, which is a sensor device. It's got a touch screen. It's got motion and proximity sensors. It's got the microphone. It's got location via GPS or cell tower triangulation. And then it takes all that data and mixes it, right, with these amazing cloud services, the speech recognition, the search, the location data. And there's a really important point here. Google is better at speech recognition than they have any right to be, because they know what you're likely to say. When you say pizza, they have this huge database of a gazillion searches that say, yeah, people are much more likely to be searching for pizza than, say, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or saying piece of, or whatever, so that sounds like. So they use the Google Suggest database to actually improve their speech recognition algorithm. And then, of course, they tie that into their search database to actually find you the pizza places. And then they actually have another database that says, where are they? All right? So, and these context-sensitive filters are applied in real time to give, the pizza eater just the information they need. And that's the shape of the future, in real time. Now, continuing on with this theme of who has lots and lots of data and what does it mean, think about what happened when Google announced free turn-by-turn navigation on the Android phones. This is the kind of stuff that you used to pay to have a GPS for, that Navtech was selling, and they were selling a $99 iPhone app for. All of a sudden, it's free. And what's so interesting is, look at all the things that were put together. Search in plain English. I can actually say, too, I mean, not just type. I can say Santa Clara Convention Center, and it'll figure out where that is and get me a route to it. It'll show me traffic along the route. I can actually search for other things nearby while I'm going along. I can see the satellite view. I can see the street view. And oh my gosh, when I actually pull up, I might actually be seeing what the street corner looks like. And again, all these cooperating cloud services stitched together to support an application of the future. So once again, I would say database. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means, right? Because it's not just the database itself. It's not just the software. It's the data that's in it that is becoming the source and the basis for next-generation applications. And I started talking about this back in 2002 with the metaphor of an Internet operating system. We actually had a conference called Building the Internet Operating System here in Santa Clara. Over time, I don't think I saw it as clearly then, I've come to realize that the Internet operating system is a data operating system, right? It helps applications find out about people, places, things, prices, documents, images, sounds, relationships. And then it helps people to interact with them. Search, obviously. Payment. I want to buy that thing. I want to actually recognize that thing. All kinds of services that are based on the actual data in those subsystems. And it does all this in real time. Really important post on this subject by Jeff Jonas, who's one of my mentors in the big data world. He's works for IBM, but just a really interesting thinker. IBM did a commercial based on one of his sort of just little thought experiments. And it was about the importance of real time. And he said, imagine if you had to cross the street based on a snapshot of what traffic looked like 5 minutes ago. You know, wouldn't be very useful, even a minute ago. And I think we're really getting to a world where this ambient awareness is going to have to be in real time at massive scale. And so this is the 21st century data challenge. It's not transactions. It's not data warehouses and business intelligence. It's not database-backed websites. It's not even NoSQL-backed web services. It's real-time cloud-based intelligence delivered to mobile apps. And a lot of these depend on a kind of algorithmic intelligence. So that's the world that your database engines are going to need to be designed to support. You're going to have to think about that application space. And of course, many of you are, and many of the new tools that are part of this growing ecosystem around open source databases and actually just databases in general are supporting this world. But fixate yourself on that future. Realize that we're not all the way there yet, that it's going to get bigger, it's going to get faster, it's going to get harder, it's going to get more important. And there's going to be more data, more kinds of problems that can be solved, more opportunities. And go for that future. Don't build for the database world of today. Don't build for the database world of yesterday, for sure. Build for the database world that you can see coming. So there's a related question. If we're building an internet operating system, who is going to own it? Now, I'm an open source guy, and I'd like to think that nobody owns it. Nobody owns the internet today. Nobody owns the World Wide Web. But there are real concerns that I have about this coming internet operating system. You know, do we want anyone to own it? Because if we don't, we'd better get busy. I wrote a blog post last year called The War for the Web, in which I started to outline some of what I see happening, where different companies are starting to draw more and more of the services to themselves. You know, they used to be, hey, we're part of this big collaborative experiment. You know, Google passes traffic to lots and lots of other people. And all of a sudden, Google starts adding more and more services where it's a closed loop. It comes back to Google. So, for example, when you do a local search, it used to be maybe you might get some Yelp results, and now you get to a Google Place page. So there's this concept that I got from Wall Street when I did my Money Tech conferences, which was really kind of alarming. I was trying to think about what can we learn from the history of Wall Street? Because, of course, financial markets are network markets that are bigger and more valuable even than the internet. And so, well, what will they teach us? And one of my wake-up lessons was that all these companies that started out by being brokers, you know, by helping people, for example, to buy and sell, started trading for their own account. They started trading against their customers. And so I started watching for that behavior on the internet. And you see increasingly the giants of the internet are trading for their own account. They are building a platform in which all roads lead back to themselves. Now, there is a countervailing force for openness, but we have to be wary. We have to be aware of that. We have to work for openness in that web. Because there are two models of platforms. I've used this image for now, I think, 7, 8 years. The internet, small pieces loosely joined. Nobody owns it. The picture on the right is a routing map of the internet. It's this cloud in which anybody can connect to anyone else, and the structure is emergent. And then there's the model of platform that Tolkien wrote about in Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all. That is, we'll build a platform that everybody will have to use, will become dependent on, and that will give us control. I prefer the whole internet model, I don't want to go back into a world in which the platform is owned by a single company, whatever kind of company that is, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. It's not a world that I think is good for all of us. So I wrote about a piece about this recently called The State of the Internet Operating System. If you haven't read it, I urge you to do so if you find these ideas compelling. I'm working on part 2, which is kind of a breakdown of looking at some of these subsystems and who owns what. This is I know this is an eye chart. You can't read it there, but it will be up later online, and I'll be putting up part 2 of this post. We're trying to say, okay, we got various companies, and they have assets. You know, so Amazon has some really powerful stuff at the infrastructure as a service level. Google and Microsoft have their own platforms at that level, and then there's others like VMware and so on, or Oracle for that matter. Media access, you know, to music, videos, books, web content, photos. You know, there's advertising and payment platforms. There's location platforms. And you know, what you see is some of the players are starting to assemble a pretty comprehensive suite of services where they can do it all, where they can build this next generation of applications without you ever having to use a service from anyone else. But the column that is the fullest on this chart is the one that's labeled Other. And that is the one hope that I have, because there are companies that have assets in every one of these what I would call Internet Operating System subsystems, you know, where there's somebody who says, yeah, I can do payment, I can't really do anything else. Somebody says, I can do speech recognition, I can't really do anything else. I can do maps, but I can't really do anything else. And what we have to start figuring out are what are the mechanisms for these people who have best-of-breed point solutions to start cooperating in the same way that Linux is an operating system built from thousands of cooperating projects. It's not all from one vendor. And I think we have to think about the internet in that same way. We have to start saying, we have to build towards that future where mobile apps in particular, but really any kind of app, can draw on these vast data sources. But we have to figure out how do we enable cooperation at this data layer. So in that future, interoperable web services, open data, and standard protocols are at least as important as open source. We have to figure it out. In some of this, my thinking is that the underdog is the ally of open source. Because in each case, if you look at the open source strategies of the big companies as they're starting to face off in this chess game of who's going to win this Internet Operating System game, each of them is trying to give away what is valuable to someone else. And so we have to figure that out. So, you know, for example, I would lay odds that we're going to see some really, really interesting open source moves around Microsoft's Bing search engine. I'll lay odds that, you know, Microsoft, Nokia, Yelp, and Foursquare are going to be doing interesting open moves around maps. I think that Nuance and Microsoft have a good chance that we're going to see some interesting open announcements there. Google already all over. How do we open up the social graph? Why? Because, hey, because Facebook is dominant there. PayPal, I think, you know, looks at the potential risk to their business from, you know, the fact that Android and iPhone have built-in payment mechanisms right into the phone. So they're going to be saying, okay, how does open source help us? You know, cloud infrastructure. VMware is going to say, how do we make this an open strategy? Obviously, Google is doing this with smartphones and device operating systems. They're embracing open source. Now, each company that embraces open source does it for their own strategic reasons. But we as a community can benefit from that if we can start to build the mechanisms that allow us to stitch together these services. So, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff happening in open source and open data. I mean, each of these companies is making great contributions. If you look at Facebook's list, you look at Google's list, you look at things that even aren't open source but are just allow the reuse of these data services, things like Facebook Connect, you know, Open Social, you know, WebFinger, Salmon, and the work that's going on in the Open Web Foundation. There's a lot to be hopeful about in this future, that open source has a future in this cloud data future. Simple Geo recently announced our WARE conference. They're becoming a one-stop aggregator for all kinds of geo services, and they've started to present some interesting new services like this one that sort of is sort of cloud data of where people are. It's also, I was up at Las Vegas, a Gartner Business Intelligence conference where I talked yesterday, and Greenplum announced something they call Chorus, because they're really focused on looking at all their customers and saying, well, what kind of data do they have, and how do we start to enable mechanisms for them to share it creatively? Because that is something I think that we haven't thought enough about. There is a lot of data in the world, and the web is far from being all of it or all that matters. I've become involved in a lot of work in Washington recently, and particularly I'm doing some stuff with healthcare, and there's some really amazing opportunities for us to reinvent healthcare in this country with data, with open source. And, but there was one little anecdote that I thought was really interesting, because it kind of illustrates this need for companies, for institutions, to figure out how to share data while keeping business rules about what has to be private, but just how do you get it? And this story was that we were talking about community health data, and somebody said, well, we actually don't have smoking data at the county level, and it would be very expensive for us to do surveys for every county in America, because they're trying to link up, for example, smoking rates and cancer rates. And I said, well, have you ever thought about the fact that the Treasury Department collects tobacco taxes, and that's a pretty good proxy? And they're like, because the Health and Human Services people weren't thinking, oh, yeah, we could share data with the Treasury guys. And I think that's the kind of thinking that will let us start to build interesting new services. So switching tracks a little bit to this gov space. You guys probably heard, I am running some events in DC. I think there's a unique opportunity today, partly because of the Obama administration coming into power on this sort of open government premise. But also, I think there's a unique teachable moment because of the iPhone, where the phone market before the iPhone platform looked a lot like government procurement. You get together with a couple of your buddies and you come up with the plan, and then you tell the market this is it, versus opening up a platform and the market goes to town. And there's a lot of people in government who are starting to go, wow, okay, maybe we need to start acting like a platform provider. And so I'm pretty excited about that. Now, all this started, I think, with a guy named Carl Malamud. How many of you here know the work of Carl? Not very many of you. You should. He's a real hero. He's one of my heroes. In 1993, he put the SEC online from the outside. There was some interest from a few people in putting sort of stock market data, the kind of reports that people have to file with the SEC out to other than, the big investors. But they thought, oh, this will cost $50, $60 million. It'll take us 5 years. We'll eventually get around to it. Carl got a $50,000 grant from the National Science Foundation. He got some servers from Sun, actually from Eric Schmidt, who was the CTO there at the time, and a little bit of support from me. And he basically put the SEC online from the outside. This is in 1993. This is goddamn early in the history of the World Wide Web, something like May of '93. And then he operated this service for a year and a half, and then he donated it to the federal government. And that's how the federal government got its first website. All right? And so just want to remind you that hackers can make an amazing difference in the future. In the UK, there's a group called My Society. Tom Steinberg has done an amazing job building a vision of how citizens can be engaged with government. Anyway, Tom and Carl and I organized a meeting along with the Sunlight Foundation, which is carrying on the work of government transparency in brilliant ways today, back in 2007. And we ended up coming up with some data principles for open government. And I think they're also really important for thinking about data sharing by anybody else. Because we started thinking about what would it take for data to be open. And actually, I think Larry Lessig did a lot of the writing on this. We figured it would be good to have a lawyer put it down. But we basically tried to frame that public data needs to be complete. It needs to have primary sources. It needs to be timely. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be machine processable. needs to be available to anyone, non-discriminatory. It needs to be non-proprietary. It needs to be in a format in which nobody has exclusive control. And it needs to be license-free. Now, this was open government data. There may be other kinds of business rules that we actually need to start thinking about for data that is not open. Because there are a lot of cases where somebody might want to say, oh yeah, I'm willing to share this with you. I have to keep this private. And figuring out how to actually build into a database this knowledge of the actual data, I think is going to be a big revolution going forward. So anyway, these ideas are part of what the federal government is trying to do with data.gov. They're trying to basically build, if you like, an API to all these government data sources. It's a long way to go. There's a huge amount of data there. They're learning. They're struggling in a lot of ways. They've got wonderful hackers who are starting to come into the space. And Neil Dash, who some of you may know, running something called Expert Labs, which is kind of like a new kind of think tank for government, trying to figure out how to get hackers in there. There's been some amazing collaboration between the State Department and groups like the Sunlight Foundation and OpenStreetMap and Ushahidi. So there's some really great things happening there. Long way to go. But also in this thinking about open government data, Nat Torkington, who was the OSCON chair for many years, still blogs on Radar, has been working as an open government advocate back in his native New Zealand. And Nat laid out a challenge because he realized that as he got into open government data, we were screwing up badly because it was as if all we were doing with open source was just throwing out a big tar ball, and that was the limit of our tools. He said, we have to build some tools for open data. We have to be able to revision it. We have to be able to track who did what. And so I really recommend that you read this blog post that Nat wrote, because he really talks about what it's going to take for this open data world to exist is a whole new set of tooling. And I don't think that very many companies are taking up that challenge. But I think we will need it, because if in fact there is this open data operating system, as opposed to a closed data operating system belonging to one player, we're going to need a lot of creativity to build the tools that make sharing as possible as it became for all of us to share code in the open source code era. I'm going to finish with a couple of advertisements. I'm really fascinated in my work in DC. I've come across a couple of projects, and actually Brian Behlendorf, who is one of the co-founders of Apache, is now deeply involved in both of these. One is called HHS Connect, and the other is called NHIN Direct. And what they are attempts to build an open source data exchange foundation for open healthcare records. And what's so cool about this is that the government really seems to get it. They're not trying to build the big Mongo Borg of government data the way that the Tea Party people would have you think. They're saying we're going to build a minimal implementation of an open source project for exchange. And then we're going to say to the market, you go build whatever kind of end user products you want to build for hospitals, for medical clinics. And not only that, there's a big stimulus payment if hospitals adopt them, right? And we're just going to have this nice little open source kernel. And it was interesting. I was talking with Scott McNeely yesterday, and he was talking about how some of the same tools in Connect and some of the same stack could be used for other kinds of open data exchange. So I really suggest, even if you're not interested in healthcare, you might want to look at these projects, because they are thinking hard about how we might make open data work in a practical sense. And I think we need to find more projects like this that aren't just about open source, but about opening the data and figuring out how do you manage the data in such a way that you can enforce privacy, that you can enforce certain kinds of business rules, that you can understand the context for sharing. And one last advertisement. I just want to mention, I'm on the board of a group called Code for America, which was started by Leonard Lin and Jen Palka, who worked with me for years on the Web 2.0 and Gov 2.0 events. And what they're trying to do is take all this Gov 2.0 thinking, this open data thinking, this open source reuse thinking, and apply it to cities. Because we realized when we went to DC that it's an awfully big windmill. We can tilt at it all we want. It's a lot easier to get change to happen at the city level. Code for America is looking for a CTO, somebody who actually would be a full-time employee, but it's also looking for mentors, looking for fellows who would actually be willing to go spend a year working in some city to actually build cool open source software for them, which would then be shared with other cities. So if you're interested, check out the codeforamerica.org website and get in touch with me or with Jen. I think that government, paradoxically, is one of those areas where this open data meme is most advanced. And we have a short window before the political counter-revolution comes along to really show that it can make a difference. And so I urge all of you to take a look, to get involved, not just because it might help our government, it might help our society, but because I think there's a lot to learn there that you can then apply to this broader problem that I've been talking about earlier, in which we have got to build an open data operating system, or we're going to end up with an operating system that is owned by a single company that delivers fabulous services to us. And I don't know whether it's Apple or Google or Microsoft or someone that we haven't even figured out. And they're going to deliver these amazing, cool experiences, but they're not going to be the open experiences that we have taken for granted for the last 15 or 20 years in the internet and the open source community. So I urge you to think about that future, to build toward that future, and to be part of the future that we want to make happen. Thank you.